Valerie and I are delighted that you've asked us to be here. We're here to give you the resident perspective, but I should add that I'm also an actuary by profession. So of course, this will bring that financial slant into the conversation a little bit as well. But to leave more time for questions, we prepared this short video so that we can go through a number of things rather quickly, and then we'll be open to answer all of your questions. Continuing care retirement communities offer people a home for life. Here is our home. I can't think of a nicer place to live. You see the view there out over the gardens toward the Pacific Ocean. If somebody's going to have to live somewhere for the rest of their lives, this is certainly a highly desirable place to be. Every resident's story is unique, and ours is going to be no different. Older people are no different from young people. They have individual aspirations, fears, abilities, gumption, and varying financial resources. There's a needs-driven journey. Many of the people who live at the CCRC where I did came here when someone may have detected that they had early cognitive impairment, or they encountered some sort of physical need, or they no longer had the energy that they once did. They came here to have the backup of the care that's offered on campus. There's a lifestyle choice. Valerie and I were attracted by the carefree living, and we just thought it would be nice to have a carefree existence that would free us up to do the productive things that we'd like to do. There's a planning approach. Many people approach the decision about old age trying to plan ahead for all of the contingents that may occur. They may work with financial planners and plan out the ladders of financial resources. And there's an anxiety journey. Some people are very anxious about the approaching onset of old age, and moving to a senior living community can help relieve that anxiety. Then there's our journey. It's a love-driven journey. Every resident's life story is uniquely individual. In 1998, Valerie's parents, and there you see Valerie in the upper right, Valerie's parents moved to Rivermead in Peterborough, New Hampshire, and they were then in their late 80s. I should quickly add that now I'm in my late 80s. Never expected that to happen, but we liked what we saw at Rivermead. They had wonderful meals, a nice home, and there was care there if you needed it. In 2004, our friends the Swansons started looking for a CCRC, and they asked us to join them in their search, which we did. Joel Swanson and I both wanted our wives to be among friends if we were to die before them. Valerie has been very, very good for me, and I want to assure her that she can have a wonderful life even after I'm gone. And since my forebears had tended to die suddenly in their early 70s, I thought for sure that would happen to me, and I wanted her to be all set up before that occurred. The Swansons moved to Air Force Village West, but we were not eligible for that since you had to be a retired Air Force officer at that time. Finally, in 2006, we moved to Carlsbad by the Sea retirement community, where we've lived ever since. Our move was mostly positive. Downsizing was challenging. We went from a two-story house into an apartment, And we needed two offices since we were both still working. We worked mostly from home. And that was not really possible in a two-bedroom apartment where we had to share one of the bedrooms as an office. That was difficult when we were on phone conversations and that sort of thing. You can imagine how that would be. There was no working space in the community. I think it was just assumed that people would be retired. We took pride that we had responsibly taken action for our own contingencies of aging. Neither of us wanted to be a burden on our children or on other people as we aged. We discovered the joys of communal living and made many new friends. The food was tasty without the burdens of preparation and cleanup. And after a year, we relocated to a two-office living unit, so that challenge of climbing all over each other as we were trying to work during the day disappeared. There are many positives. Congregate living is less lonely and less isolating than to be an empty nester in a single-family home. Imagine how that is when you're living there as a couple and one of the couple dies or has to move to a nursing facility. It can be a very challenging time. Congregate living is more environmentally responsible than a single family house. Just think of how much more efficient it is to heat an apartment building with interior walls versus the cost to heat a single family house with many exterior walls. It's inherently less efficient. We really liked the freedom from the chores of everyday life, cooking, maintenance, and more. But there's also room for improvement. And that means there's opportunity for all of you in this class. We loved the location. We loved the concept, but we were naive and simply assumed that all was what it appeared to be, carefree and liberating. We didn't expect to have little voice in decisions. And we, or more properly, I should say I, since I'd been a health and life insurance actuary, assumed that CCRC finances would be regulated as are the insurance companies with which I was familiar. After all, the elderly are more vulnerable than most policyholders. We found that that was not the case. Here's an example from a Massachusetts study that I did in 2018 when I came to Massachusetts to speak to a group of residents. Most Massachusetts nonprofit CCRCs do not cover their costs with their revenues. That means they're eating into capital. The money has to come from somewhere. And that, not surprisingly, shows up in the CCRC balance sheets. Incidentally, this is limited to nonprofits since family, business, and closely held corporations are not required to disclose their finances. And although these are specific CCRCs, we've used letters so that you wouldn't zero in on one or another particular example. We want you to have the general picture of how the finances are in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This shows how the oversight by the Office of Elder Affairs has worked versus the oversight by the insurance department of the life and annuity insurance industry. The long and the short of it is that the financial strength of the CCRC industry overall as an entire industry is impaired, while the life insurance industry is operating with a healthy surplus. CCRC financial soundness is one of those areas that needs some work. Of course, residents want sound finances. Many also want a role in governance. For example, Beaumont Senior Living in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, is a cooperative, not-for-profit, CCRC, in which the residents are the voting members in governance rather than just the financial interests, as is common. No one wants to be second class in their own home. That Beaumont example is not unique, but it's very rare. Most CCRCs, most nonprofit CCRCs, are structured either to have no members or to have a single corporate member so that they can function like a conglomerate. And the residents are excluded from having voting membership in almost all nonprofit CCRCs. The growth of interconnectivity in the gig economy is making it less urgent for people to seek the safe haven of a CCRC. For instance, when we moved in 2006, the fact that the CCRC would provide transportation to appointments was an important attraction, since we could foresee a time when we might no longer be able to drive. But as it turned out, today we have Uber and we have Lyft, and that's no longer as major a consideration as it was just 15 years ago. Moreover, the attraction of age-denominated living for people aged 60 or 65 and older is far less today than it was in 1970, when changes in the tax law made it attractive for enterprises to expand their senior living offerings and to develop the luxury CCRC, which prevails today. The propensity to need care is also diminishing as medicine advances and longevity is increased. So we're living longer and we're dependent for shorter periods of time. We don't need assisted living for as many years as was the case when strokes prevailed, and people frequently lived many years with diminished brain function from the destructive forces of paralytic strokes. Our lives are much better today, despite the pandemic. In challenge is where opportunity is found. And in these challenges that I've just gone over, I'm sure that some of you, leaders for your generation in this industry, will find very satisfying opportunities. And change is where the future lies. Can the hospitality concept of congregate living prove attractive for people of all ages? That could allow senior living to morph into better living for all. Better living for all would expand the market reach well beyond this age floor that now prevails for most senior living. Can a market shift toward integrating life, family, work, and recreation result in neighborhood living in place of the suburban / urban / life / work artificial divides and separations of today? We've had some experience of that during the pandemic as people were allowed to work from home, and they gradually adapted to live a more integrated life. And I think most of those who were able to do that successfully found that quite satisfying compared to the alternative of commuting for half an hour each way every day to a place of work. Can giving ownership and voice to residents make communal living more attractive than today's "you fund it, we own it" model? By "you fund it, we own it," that refers to the fact that entrance fees are used to provide the at-risk equity capital to secure the debt, so that the debt interests are senior in the financial makeup of the corporation to the savings of the residents that go into paying entrance fees. When there's a financial failure, the resident entrance fees are usually, not always, but usually burned through before the debt providers are affected. That's the legal structure of today. So the residents pay the down payment that in a home ownership would secure the home ownership, but they don't own it. It's owned by some abstract corporate entity. So can we give ownership and voice to the residents to make it more attractive than today's you fund it, we own it model? Lastly, can we restore the American values of mutual help and support through village concepts beyond corporate interests of growth and control? In a CCRC, the residents are viewed as the ones needing help, and the staff are viewed as the ones giving help. There's very little mutuality. The alternative is something called the village movement, which started right here in Boston by a group of upper-class Beacon Hill residents. For those of you who know Lewisburg Square, that area, they lived there. They were open-minded and they wanted to reach out beyond the frame of the Back Bay and Beacon Hill. And they developed something which is now going nationwide, a concept of older, aging people helping each other, and then only coming into institutional circumstances when there's no better mutual support alternative. Many of you may come to work in the village movement if it progresses as most of the people involved with it seem to believe that it will. Finally, how can we dispel these common ageist myths that view old age as something to be dreaded, as nothing more than decline culminating in death? Let's take a look at some of these myths. First is the myth that old age is distressing. That's the foundation by which most of the not-for-profits are able to gain the tax exemption that allows them to avoid paying taxes. In fact, in many states where the state taxation is derivative from the federal taxation, they don't even have to pay property taxes, because in 1972, the Internal Revenue Service issued Revenue Ruling 72-124, which held that because old age is distressing, any enterprise that alleviates the distress of old age is inherently charitable and therefore entitled to 501c3 tax exemption. I can assure you, I'm relatively old. I know how it ends. Old age does not end well, but it's definitely not distressing. I'm enjoying my life very much. And why would I find that distressing? As a matter of fact, none of us know when our lives are going to end. We're all at risk all the time. And it's best to enjoy every day. And I can assure you that there's no happier group than those who are old. So that's purely a myth. Old age is distressing. Another myth is that old age is not productive because it's retirement. Well, the evidence is in, and it's decisive, that settling into a recliner is a sure way to shorten one's existence. So it's best to stay productive for all your life. And most people are happier being productive. I think if you find a job that you don't enjoy, for heaven's sake, look around and try to find something you can enjoy. My work has always been my passion, my hobby, what I love doing. And I can't imagine how miserable life must be if somebody has to perform a task that they don't even enjoy or like or get fulfillment from. So old age too should have the fulfillment of productive existence. The myth of retirement is becoming less and less prominent as people look for purpose and meaning in their lives. There's a myth that old people are cute, like grown-up gray children. Oh, isn't that cute? The way that little old lady is crossing the street against the light. Well, it's not cute and it's dangerous. So we need to end that myth. And yes, there are challenges to old age. And yes, they can make us look at them as different from what we are, but they're still people and they still deserve to have human dignity. There's the myth that old people are gullible and not very sharp. Well, there's some truth to this, but that's not true of everyone. And there are many people who are highly qualified as they age. They may have been qualified all along. I mean, at every age, there are some people who are natural leaders, either intellectually or in socially or in other ways. And there are others who prefer to let others take the responsibility of leadership, and they wait to see how it goes. So while it's true that there is a vulnerability about old age that some people take advantage of with confidence games that are targeting the elderly, it's not true that all old people are gullible and not very sharp. There's a myth that old people need many doctors. And this is an outgrowth of the Great Society programs, Medicare and Medicaid of 1965, when the legislation provided that specialists should be paid more than general practitioners, and that super specialists should be paid more than mere specialists. So today we have things like cardiac electrophysiologists who specialize in the ablation of cardiac nodes, that sort of thing, and they are very well compensated. But the evidence is from a program that's called All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly, that having geriatricians work with people or where they congregate rather than in the doctor's office produces lower cost medicine with much better outcomes. And that's a model that we need to consider. And some of you will have a chance to be leaders as that movement toward the program of all-inclusive care for the elderly expands and reaches more and more people. There's a myth that old people can't manage their own lives. Again, here, there's some truth to it, but everybody wants some control in their lives. No one, no matter how demented they may become, wants to be rendered totally helpless and unable to do anything for themselves. So to the extent that we can let people continue to have purpose, meaning, and self-management in their lives, we can enrich the lives of all people. People want to matter. They want to be seen. They want to be recognized for their individuality and for the capabilities that they have. There's a myth that old people are poor. Well, it's certainly true that many are indigent. In fact, people who work at these minimum wage jobs where there's no real provision for that allows them to save for anything, they are rendered indigent merely by the circumstances of our social systems. But for the middle class and those who are more affluent, they've been saving toward their old age. And if those savings are invested, many of them have far more wealth than you'd ever imagine just from talking to them or getting to know them. So not all old people are poor. Lastly, there's a myth that old people should not be involved in communal and national and world leadership. Vladimir Putin is 69. Schumer, 71. Joe Biden, 79. Mitch McConnell, age 80. Nancy Pelosi, 81. Queen Elizabeth, 95. And still a servant of the people. And lastly, my personal favorite, Marlon Enns, who's 101. You may not know Marlon Enns, but he was pivotal in the early days of this industry. He was instrumental in founding, and he was the first executive director for Mount Miguel Covenant Village, which was an anchor property for the Covenant family of senior housing homes across the nation today. 101 years old. He's still active. He's still advocating. And he's still making a difference. You've chosen a challenging and rewarding career with great opportunity. Congratulations. And now we're ready to take your questions.